What if I told you that over 90% of films made before 1929 have vanished forever? We're not talking about bad movies nobody wanted to save. We're talking about masterpieces, cultural treasures, and the very foundations of cinema itself. The golden age of Hollywood didn't just create legends, it systematically destroyed them. Here's the shocking truth about why your favorite classic films are disappearing. Studios literally threw away movie history for warehouse space. Back in the day, movie studios treated films like yesterday's newspaper. Once a movie finished its theatrical run, executives saw those reels as nothing more than fire hazards taking up valuable real estate. Warner Brothers, MGM, and Paramount would routinely dump entire film libraries into dumpsters or sell them to scrap metal dealers for pennies. The most heartbreaking example happened at MGM in 1970, when studio executives ordered the destruction of thousands of nitrate film prints to make room for parking spaces. Workers literally shoveled decades of cinematic history into garbage trucks. Among the casualties were early Greta Garbo films, rare Charlie Chaplin shorts, and countless silent-era masterpieces. One janitor later recalled finding torn strips of film featuring Rudolph Valentino blowing in the wind across the studio lot like confetti. The studio saved maybe 3 prints of major films and destroyed everything else. These weren't just movies, they were cultural artifacts worth millions today. But to studio accountants in 1970, they were worthless junk cluttering up valuable California real estate. Nitrate film stock was basically cinema dynamite. Every movie made before 1950 was shot on nitrate film stock, which was essentially controlled explosives wrapped in pretty pictures. This stuff was so flammable it could spontaneously combust in hot weather, and once it started burning, water couldn't put it out. The chemical composition was nearly identical to gunpowder, making every film vault a potential bomb waiting to go off. The most devastating fire happened at the Fox Film Corporation vault in 1937, where temperatures reached over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The blaze was so intense that firefighters had to retreat and let an entire building full of movies burn to ash. Over 40,000 reels went up in smoke, including most of Theda Bara's vampire films and Tom Mix westerns. The toxic fumes were so dangerous that residents within a 5-mile radius had to evacuate their homes. Another catastrophic fire at MGM's New Jersey storage facility in 1978 destroyed prints of films starring Clark Gable, Joan Crawford, and Spencer Tracy. Firefighters described the scene as looking like a war zone, with melted film canisters scattered everywhere like metallic snow. The insurance companies eventually refused to cover nitrate storage, forcing studios to choose between preservation and financial survival. Most chose money over movies. Silent films were murdered by the talkies revolution. When sound films exploded in 1929, Hollywood didn't just move forward, it actively erased its silent past. Studios viewed silent films as embarrassing relics that made their new sound pictures look primitive by comparison. Theater owners were ordered to destroy their silent film collections and replace them with talkies, even if those older films were masterpieces. The most tragic victim was Erich von Stroheim's epic Greed, originally a 10-hour masterpiece that studio executives butchered down to 2 hours before ultimately destroying the remaining footage entirely. Von Stroheim reportedly wept when he learned that his original vision had been chopped up and sold for guitar picks and shoe heels, common fates for unwanted film stock. First National Pictures went even further, issuing a company-wide memo in 1930 ordering all silent films to be disposed of immediately to avoid confusion with their new sound catalog. Projectionist unions were instructed to report any theaters still showing silent films, effectively turning movie workers into informants against cinema history. The surviving fragments of destroyed silent classics occasionally surface in the strangest places. Collectors have found pieces of lost films being used as garden mulch, Christmas decorations, and even fish tank filters. World War II turned movies into weapons. During World War II, the government needed silver for military equipment, and guess what contained massive amounts of recoverable silver? Film stock. The War Production Board ordered studios to surrender their film collections for silver reclamation, turning movie history into bullets and bomb components. This wasn't voluntary patriotism, it was legally mandated cultural destruction. Columbia Pictures alone surrendered over 200,000 pounds of film to the war effort, representing hundreds of titles from the 1930s. The silver recovery process involved dissolving the film in acid baths, completely destroying any possibility of future restoration. Studio executives were told that hoarding film during wartime was unpatriotic and could result in federal prosecution. Even personal collections owned by stars like Mary Pickford were confiscated for the war effort. The most bitter irony came when American soldiers overseas wrote letters home begging for entertainment films, unaware that those same movies were being melted down to make the weapons they carried. After the war, nobody bothered to replace the destroyed films because studios were already focused on their next profitable ventures. The government never acknowledged that they had effectively wiped out decades of American cultural heritage in the name of military necessity. Television networks cannibalized classic films for quick cash. When television exploded in the 1950s, networks desperately needed content to fill 24-hour programming schedules. Studios happily sold their film libraries to TV stations for quick profits, but there was a catch. Networks only wanted the broadcast rights, not the responsibility of preservation. Once they aired a film a few times, they'd often destroy the prints to make room for newer content. Local TV stations were the worst offenders, treating classic films like disposable programming. WPIX in New York famously dumped hundreds of 1930s films into the Hudson River after their broadcast rights expired, claiming storage costs were too expensive. The station manager later admitted they viewed old movies as dead weight that prevented them from buying more current programming. CBS went even further, establishing a policy of automatically destroying any film print after 5 broadcasts, regardless of its cultural or artistic value. Network executives argued that viewers wanted new content, not ancient history from Hollywood's past. The most heartbreaking casualties were holiday classics that could have generated revenue for decades. Entire Christmas and Halloween film collections were destroyed because short-sighted executives couldn't imagine audiences wanting to watch the same movies year after year. Many of these films would be worth millions in licensing fees today. International film prints vanished in political chaos. Studios routinely sent film prints to international distributors, but political upheavals, wars, and revolutions destroyed these foreign copies, along with any hope of recovery. European archives were bombed during World War II, Asian collections were lost during various conflicts, and South American prints deteriorated in tropical climates without proper storage facilities. The most devastating loss occurred during the Spanish Civil War, when the Filmoteca Nacional in Madrid was destroyed by artillery fire, taking with it the only surviving prints of dozens of American films from the 1920s. Similarly, the bombing of Berlin in 1945 wiped out the massive UFA film archive, which contained German-language versions of Hollywood productions that exist nowhere else. Japanese distributors lost entire collections during the Tokyo firebombing, including the only surviving prints of several Universal horror films with Japanese subtitles. Revolutionary governments in various countries sometimes deliberately destroyed Western films as symbols of cultural imperialism. Che Guevara's forces in Cuba burned hundreds of Hollywood film prints in public ceremonies, viewing them as capitalist propaganda. Natural disasters added to the destruction. The 1960 Chilean earthquake buried an entire film warehouse under tons of rubble, and the prints were never recovered due to political instability and lack of resources. Color film technology created a preservation nightmare. Early color processes like Technicolor required multiple film strips that had to be stored together to recreate the original image. When one strip deteriorated or went missing, the entire film became unwatchable. Studios often separated these components for storage efficiency, but poor record-keeping meant that pieces of the same movie ended up scattered across different warehouses or even sold to different collectors. The 3-strip Technicolor process used for classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind was particularly vulnerable because each color layer aged at different rates. The magenta dye faded fastest, turning vibrant colors into sickly green-tinted nightmares. Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs survived only because the studio spent a fortune in the 1990s digitally reconstructing the original colors from badly faded prints. Many other Technicolor films weren't so lucky. The color strips for Becky Sharp, the first feature-length film shot entirely in 3-strip Technicolor, deteriorated beyond repair despite multiple restoration attempts. Some studios tried to save money by storing only 1 strip of each Technicolor film, making restoration impossible even when the remaining elements survived. The complex chemistry of early color processes also created new types of decay that preservationists didn't understand until it was too late to save many films. Studio mergers triggered mass film destruction. Every time studios merged or were sold, the new owners viewed old film libraries as expensive liabilities rather than valuable assets. Incoming executives would order immediate cleanups of storage facilities, leading to the wholesale destruction of films that didn't fit their new corporate image or seemed commercially worthless. When MGM was sold to Ted Turner in 1986, the new management discovered warehouses full of nitrate film prints that previous owners had simply ignored for decades. Rather than spending millions on proper preservation, Turner's team ordered most of the collection to be destroyed, keeping only films they planned to colorize for television broadcast. The destroyed titles included early Joan Crawford vehicles, rare Lon Chaney horror films, and countless shorts featuring future stars in their first screen appearances. Similar purges happened when Paramount absorbed smaller studios like Republic Pictures. Republic's massive collection of B-westerns and serials was deemed worthless by Paramount executives who ordered the entire archive to be bulldozed into a landfill. Employees later reported seeing John Wayne's early films being used as road fill in Los Angeles construction projects. The most tragic example occurred when United Artists was reorganized in 1981. The new management literally auctioned off film prints by the pound to scrap dealers, with no regard for their content or historical value. Film labs destroyed movies to avoid storage costs. Processing laboratories were responsible for developing and storing massive quantities of film, but they operated on thin profit margins that made long-term storage economically impossible. When studios stopped paying storage fees, labs would auction off or destroy film collections to reclaim valuable warehouse space. Technicolor Labs in Hollywood became a notorious graveyard for classic films when the company changed hands in the 1970s. The new owners discovered that storing decades of film prints was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, with no corresponding revenue. Their solution was to offer the entire collection to the highest bidder, but when no buyers emerged, they hired demolition crews to clear the warehouses. Witnesses reported seeing workers using flamethrowers to burn through massive piles of film canisters, creating toxic black clouds that darkened the Los Angeles sky for days. Deluxe Laboratories followed a similar pattern, destroying thousands of prints when studios stopped paying storage fees during the recession of the early 1980s. Lab workers later admitted they recognized famous titles in the destruction pile, but were powerless to save them due to legal liability issues. Some labs tried to donate their collections to universities or museums, but most institutions lacked the storage facilities and expertise needed to preserve nitrate film safely. Home video revolution made theatrical prints worthless. When VHS and later DVD technology emerged, studios focused entirely on transferring their most commercial titles to the new formats while abandoning thousands of films that seemed unmarketable. Theatrical prints of these overlooked movies were destroyed to make room for video production facilities. The most short-sighted decision came from Disney, which destroyed hundreds of animated shorts and live-action features from the 1940s and 1950s because executives believed audiences only wanted to see Mickey Mouse and the famous princess films. These destroyed titles included experimental animation techniques and celebrity cameos that would fascinate modern audiences. Warner Brothers made similar mistakes, pulping entire collections of musical shorts and comedy reels because they seemed too dated for video release. Studio executives failed to anticipate that future audiences might appreciate these films as historical documents or artistic achievements. The rise of home video also killed the revival theater market, where many forgotten films had found new audiences. Without the possibility of profitable re-release, studios saw no reason to maintain expensive film archives. By the 1990s, major studios were routinely destroying prints of any film that hadn't been transferred to video, creating an artificial scarcity that persists today. Natural disasters and poor storage decimated film archives. Hollywood's film storage facilities were often located in areas prone to earthquakes, floods, and fires, but studios refused to invest in proper disaster protection because they viewed old films as expendable inventory. When natural disasters struck, entire collections vanished overnight with no backup copies available. The 1994 Northridge earthquake destroyed several major film storage facilities in the San Fernando Valley, burying thousands of prints under collapsed concrete and steel. Rescue workers focused on saving human lives, leaving film canisters to be crushed by aftershocks and contaminated by ruptured water pipes. The Malibu fires of 1993 consumed a private archive containing rare prints of films starring Rudolph Valentino, Clara Bow, and other silent-era legends. The owner had stored the collection in his hillside mansion without fireproof protection, and decades of cinema history went up in flames within hours. Hurricane damage to East Coast storage facilities has also claimed numerous film collections over the years. A warehouse in New Jersey lost its entire inventory when Hurricane Sandy's storm surge filled the building with toxic floodwater that dissolved nitrate film into poisonous sludge. Insurance companies typically classified old films as having minimal value, so owners rarely bothered to invest in proper climate control or security systems that might have prevented these losses. Copyright confusion prevented rescue efforts. Complex ownership disputes and unclear copyright status paralyzed preservation efforts for thousands of films, as lawyers and heirs battled over rights while the actual prints deteriorated beyond salvation. Studios often couldn't afford to preserve films when they weren't certain who legally owned them. The estate of silent film star Mary Pickford spent over 20 years in court fighting with various studios over the rights to her early films, while the actual prints crumbled in storage facilities nobody wanted to pay for. By the time the legal disputes were resolved, most of the films had deteriorated beyond any possibility of restoration. Similar battles erupted over the estates of deceased directors, producers, and stars, with each party claiming ownership while refusing to fund preservation efforts. Some films fell into a legal black hole where multiple parties claimed ownership, but none wanted the financial responsibility of preservation. International co-productions created additional complications, as films might be owned by different entities in different countries, making global preservation efforts nearly impossible to coordinate. The most frustrating cases involved films where the copyright had technically expired, making them public domain, but the physical prints remained locked in private collections or studio vaults that refused access to preservationists. So, there you have it, the real reasons why Golden Age Hollywood is disappearing before our eyes. It wasn't time or accident that killed these films, it was greed, negligence, and a stunning lack of vision from the very people who created them. Which of these destruction stories shocked you the most? And here's the controversial question that demands an answer. If studios cared so little about preserving their own masterpieces, do they really deserve to control what we see and remember about cinema history? Sound off in the comments, because this debate is far from over.